So we ended up just having to chip away the concrete, trying to follow the pipes and see where they were actually going. Welcome back to part 2 of this renovation project of a 1930s semi-detached house in Gosforth that we purchased quite a long time ago, and we ended up renovating the whole thing from top to bottom. Had some amazing suggestions of what to do with a property like this, so thank you so much for all of your comments. Let's get to it, and I'll show you what we did. Hiya folks, welcome back, and as I say, thank you so much for all the comments that you left of all your ideas of what to do with this property. Let's get straight to it, and I'll show you what we actually ended up doing. Just a very quick reminder. So it is a 1930s semi-detached, large semi-detached property. Beautifully maintained over the years, but in desperate need of modernisation, and it does need some quite extensive work done to it. As I mentioned last time, it's a big house, but it's got this tiny little kitchen at the back of the property, and it's not really appropriate to the size of the house. But it's just the way things were done back then. So a couple of things before I start. This isn't grand design, so don't expect us to be spending £200,000 or £300,000 renovating this property. This is kind of a normal renovation, so hopefully you'll like what we've ended up doing to it, but at the same time we didn't have an infinite pot of cash to spend on the place. So if you remember from last time, the bedrooms didn't need a huge amount of work doing to them. The master bedroom was more or less fine the way it was. Ended up fitting spotlights in pretty much every room in the house because I am a big fan of downlights. But other than that, the room was pretty much fine the way it was. It didn't really need a huge amount done to it. Bedroom 2 gets a little bit more interesting. So if you remember, this is the bedroom that had a sink in one of the wardrobes. This is the way it was when we moved in, and then obviously when it was cleared out a little bit. And then eventually, obviously, we moved in and it became a functional bedroom, but it did need a fair bit doing to it. So probably one of the major things was lifting all the carpets and just getting new electrics running. We'll talk about the electrics a little bit more later on because the whole property needed to be rewired. And here is that sink hidden away in that cupboard. Wasn't really needed. We actually ended up removing all of the cabinet fronts, which I'll show you in a little bit, but that meant we had quite a lot of spare wood and it would be a shame not using it, so we just used a couple of the spare doors to block up the back of that cupboard, put a base to the cabinet in, and that was it. Basically turned into a normal wardrobe then. From that point, we just fitted some sliding doors. These, I think, were just IKEA sliding doors that we ended up fitting onto this entire wardrobe section just to kind of brighten it up and make it a bit more modern. And in the end, after a bit of a lick of paint and new curtains, that was that bedroom completely done. Nice views over the back garden, quite a clean kind of finish. Nothing really to write home about on that bedroom. It's not particularly exciting, but it did the job. It's a lovely room. Bedroom 3, this is the one with this slightly unusual kind of sticking out window. It had a lovely kind of fabric wallpaper on, so we ended up having this room completely replastered from top to bottom. Obviously that entailed removing radiators and whatnot, and we needed access under the floor for the rewire anyway. If you remember before, it had these kind of slightly old-fashioned built-ins along this wall, which we didn't really need. And after that, it turned into my son's bedroom, and it was a pleasant, airy room, a nice, light, airy room. And you can tell we were in the property long enough that we ended up actually upgrading from the little bed there to a slightly bigger kind of bunk bed type thing. So that corner that you were looking at, so it was like that, and it ended up with a wardrobe in that corner. But it gives you an idea of the size that we're kind of talking about here. All of these rooms are quite big bedrooms. Bedroom 4, similar kind of story again. This just needed the sink removed. Obviously floors needed lifted for the rewire. We did actually end up paying decorators to put wallpaper up in this bedroom, which didn't go particularly well. I've never had much joy with decorators. I think we've just been unlucky really. The decorators that we used said it would be fine to wallpaper over the top of the wallpaper that was already in, and you can see how well that worked. You can see all the wallpaper was almost just completely hanging off the walls, but it ended up being quite a nice, pleasant room. This is how it was beforehand with the sink and whatnot, and then obviously this ended up being my daughter's room, who we'll chat about that a little bit later on, because my daughter was born while we were living in this house, so obviously we're trying to do a full renovation now with two very young children. But really nice, pleasant kind of room, and absolutely did the job for my little girl, and I don't think she ever noticed that the wallpaper was half hanging off the walls, and in all honesty, it'll save someone a job if they move in and don't need a bright pink bedroom. I'm going to get onto the more exciting things very soon, but just to show you, the loft was pretty much untouched. There was a lot of insulation up there. A lot of the insulation needed moved for the rewire anyway, but you can see there was plumbing all over the place. The plumbing in this property was, let's just say, interesting. Again, not a lot to report in the loft. Once all the plumbing and electrics were sorted out, it was just a question of boarding part of it out for storage. This actually shows a route through to the hot water tank, which was kind of above the bathroom there. We'll talk about that shortly as well. It would have been lovely to actually fully convert the loft, but yeah, not in budget. And to be honest, the house was big enough the way it was. We didn't need it to be even bigger. All we really needed it for was for storage, so we've got a new loft hatch in and a section of the loft boarded out. Right, let's get on to some of the more slightly exciting parts of this renovation. And obviously, we've got this kind of gaping area above the garage that is just begging for a fifth bedroom to get built, and in all honesty, it was the perfect area for a drum room. If you're not aware already, I play the drums, and I've always dreamed of having a house big enough that I can actually set my drum kit up in the house, which has never been practical in any of the properties that we've lived in before. But by having a fifth bedroom above the garage here, I could potentially have a drum room. We had a building company in to do this. They did an awesome job. I was very, very happy with the work. So I'll step you through the whole build as quickly as I can. The first thing that happens on a project like this is you want to check where all the drains are running, and you need to get an architect involved, obviously, to come up with some plans. Building regs also insisted on having a trial pit dug to check if the foundations were up to scratch on the garage, and they weren't. So the garage needed to be underpinned. Underpinning is where they literally dig underneath the current foundations and make the foundations bigger. This is inside the actual trial pit, and that there is a drain that is currently in use. Luckily, that drain was temporarily blocked off at the time, so it wasn't causing too much of a problem. There is the actual drain pipe there. This is the underpinning getting carried out. So basically they've dug a trench along the side here, and they do it in alternate sections. So they'll dig a hole here and a hole here, and they'll underpin that. They've already done this section here and this section here, so they'll do it kind of in sections. So that bit's done, they'll wait for that to set, and then they'll do this bit here and this bit here. And then once that's all done and dusted, then they can put this drain back in, because that drain needs to obviously connect up to something. So you can see a new access chamber going in for the drains here. That's all part of the same work. And just another quick spy into the actual underpinned sections of the foundation. By the way, if you are interested in knowing how much this renovation cost, or how much it costs to underpin a garage wall, you know, if you want to know all that sort of stuff, I'm providing a full breakdown of the cost of this renovation over on my Patreon, so head over there, there's a link in the description. Moving on, and this is the old garage roof here, and you can see where the new walls are going to join onto the existing walls. They need to cut into the existing walls so that the insulation is basically consistent all the way around, or continuous all the way around the property. So the new insulation that goes in on the walls that are going to come across here is basically going to make contact with the existing cavity wall insulation that's already in the property. I'm not a bricklayer, but I think this is called corbelling when the wall is brought out like this, and it's effectively to make the new wall wide enough to have a cavity in it, because obviously the existing garage wall down below here wouldn't have a cavity. That's just double skin brick, and above it needs to be brick with a cavity filled with insulation and then block on the inside. So the wall is basically corbelled out to cope with that. At the front of the property, the extension needs to be set back slightly. It's to avoid a kind of terraced look to the house. It's a very common thing, and it's also because of this corner window here. You wouldn't want to lose that corner window. So in order to cope with that front wall being set back, there needs to be these two big steel RSJs installed, and the walls will be be built on top of these RSJs. It's hard to see, but that is the RSJ going along here, and then that is the new front wall built on top of those RSJs there. This is actually looking straight upwards from garage level here, and I thought it's quite interesting because you can see the joists of the actual floor of the extension, and then you can see the roof joists above that, and then you can see the roof structure above that. Joist hangers for the new floor joists, you can see the joist hangers are in there. These bits here are from the old garage roof, because the garage roof wasn't at the correct height for what the floor needs to be at, so those old garage roof joists could come out once the new flooring joists were all in. And here you get a better view of the new little slanted roof at the front there, the RSJ, which then has the new wall built on top of it at the front. Because I needed the room to be soundproof, this is 2 layers of high density blockwork blocking this window up. And then that was it all plastered and done and dusted. And then we're really into the final stages of the room getting finished off now. So we've got triple glazed windows going in, obviously pipework for a radiator under the window, doorway cut out for access to the upper landing. We did actually recess the doorway back into the room very slightly. I can't remember why that was. I think it was just because it felt a bit cramped at the top there, where there was 3 doorways, one for the bathroom, one for the toilet, and one into what was now bedroom 5. So we just recessed that in slightly, just so it wasn't quite as much of a squeeze at the top there. And then that's the room all plastered out and ready to rock for decorating. So in terms of soundproofing, most of this room is pretty much naturally soundproof, because on this side wall over here, there's no adjoining property. On the right hand wall, as we're looking at it here, we've got the high density blockwork that we talked about. At the back wall here, again, this is what was the outside wall of the property, so we've got a normal cavity wall there, so that's going to be pretty soundproof, and it's just a bathroom on the other side of that. The main area that's going to let sound through is the doorway. So this is actually a high density fire door, and then on top of the door itself there's a high density soundproofing material. It's a bit like lead, it's like a rubberized kind of impregnated high density material that's on top of the door, and then I've built a framework just to hide the soundproofing material really, but there's a framework over the top of it, and then just some acoustic tiles on top of that as well. So this is a big heavy door, and yeah, it's pretty soundproof. You know, it's as soundproof as you can make a door without spending thousands on it. And then that was that room all done and dusted, and finally I've got a home for my drum kit. You don't know how many years I've been waiting to have somewhere where I can actually have my drums set up in the house. I was teaching from here as well, because I don't know if you're aware, but I used to teach the drums, and the whole room worked really well as a kind of studio come teaching room. As I say, very happy with the builders. The builders did an amazing job, and I think, you know, once it was all done and dusted, it just looked like an original part of the property, to be honest. Right, on to what was our delightful turquoise bathroom. So if you remember, we've got a separate WC, and we've got a bathroom with a gorgeous turquoise bathroom suite in it. Now, we did deliberate joining the bathroom and toilet together to have like one big bathroom, but to be honest, the bathroom that's there is already a fairly decent size, and it is very handy having a separate toilet, because it just then means, you know, if someone's in the shower or in the bath, that people can still go to the toilet without disturbing them. So we figured we'd keep it as a separate loo and bathroom. The toilet itself didn't need a huge amount done to it, just needed all the tiles stripped off and the room replastered. As I say, we had this delightful turquoise bathroom suite, which I did try to get rid of on eBay, but there was no interest whatsoever. So the only option in the end was to smash it up, and yeah, My ears are still ringing now. I mean, this is a cast iron bath. There's no way you would get this out of the room in one piece. It is unbelievably heavy, and it was a question of smashing it up with a sledgehammer. Probably the noisiest thing that I've ever done in my life, but we eventually managed to get it out. As you can see, here is that fluorescent tube that was above the kind of plastic, there was like a yellow plastic above the bath, and yeah, so that's that area all stripped out, and you can kind of see all the pipework now running up behind the bath there. Shower tray itself seemed to be bespoke. I'm not sure, maybe someone can let us know in the comments, but yeah, it was made of reinforced concrete and then tiled, and I'm pretty sure that was a bespoke shower tray. I might be wrong, but yeah, let us know. I don't know if you can buy those as like a complete unit like that, but yeah, to me that seemed to be some sort of bespoke creation. While the walls were all ripped to pieces, it was a good opportunity to put some plywood inside the walls to support a sink that's going to be on the toilet side and a sink that's going to be on the bathroom side as well. We'll talk about the hot water system in this house a little bit later on. You can probably guess from the myriad of pipes there that it was quite complicated. We ended up putting a pump for the shower up in the loft, and that ended up working really well. So this was the bathroom beforehand, and once the bathroom was all completely finished, this was it all done and dusted. We've got a nice double shower, a decent sized bath. We ended up putting porcelain tiles down everywhere, which, yeah, porcelain tiles, complete nightmare. We did actually have a company to fit this for us. I didn't do the tiling. My general recommendation is porcelain tiles for the floors and ceramic tiles for the walls, if at all possible, because porcelain tiles are a nightmare to drill into. And by the way, if you're wondering, yes, I know we've got the tap in the middle of the bath, and I said not to do that last time, but in this particular bathroom I've designed it so I've got access underneath through an access hatch in the kitchen, and access from the adjoining bedroom as well, because it's just a stud wall through to the bedroom that's on the other side of that tap. And as I say, we kept a separate WC, and once that was all done and dusted, it was just quite a nice airy room, really, quite comfortable. We've got a little hand wash basin in there as well. Same porcelain tiles as in the bathroom. Jobs are good. So, onto the hallway, and if you remember the hallway, it was, again, nice but dated. It just needed quite a bit of work doing to it to sort it out. What we decided to do was to remove all of the panelling underneath the stairs here, open it out into one nice big hallway area. We also decided to remove this interior doorway as well, again just to open it up into a bigger kind of entrance lobby into the house. I did briefly mention last time, if all of the panelling had been left as bare wood, we probably would have kept it, but because since it had all been painted and it wasn't in the best of conditions, we ended up just ripping all of that wood panelling out, and obviously this is just the start of that project to find out what's actually going on behind there, and the answer is not very much, bare brick. There was more strange security features that we came across, like pressure sensors on the staircase. We found out a little bit more about that. I'm not going to go into it on YouTube because I don't want it to upset family members or anything like that. Let me just put everyone's mind at rest. No, it wasn't used as some sort of rehabilitation centre or anything like that. It was just a family home. They were paranoid about security, and when you find out a little bit more about the history of this family, then you can quite understand why. And I wouldn't want to embarrass them if they end up watching this video, or, you know, it's quite a personal thing. Let's just say in their situation I would have probably done the same thing. It's nothing to do with the area, nothing to do with the house or anything like that. once we had everything stripped out, it made sense to try and get a doorway into the garage from the hallway, because at the moment you can only get into the garage from outside, and it gave us a few options if we could get into the garage from this side. So we just had enough room to get a lintel in the top there, and that allowed us to get the doorway cut in. This is a view from inside the garage looking out into the hallway. That's it all done and dusted and all plastered with a temporary fire door fitted. We'll sort the doors later on. In case you're wondering as well, the consumer unit was moved to inside the garage. We briefly touched on it before, but the electrics in this house were horrific. It was a real nightmare under the floors. A mixture of many redundant cables. We've got all of the old alarm cables and things, so the property absolutely needed rewired, and that became more apparent as well when we got the consumer unit moved, and we actually found that the cables were oozing green goo. And if you're not familiar with what this kind of green goo syndrome is, there's a chemical that used to be used in the PVC of the cables, and over time that chemical can start oozing back out of the cables in the form of a green goo. It can literally start dripping out your sockets and light fittings and all sorts. It only affects cabling of a certain age. I think it's like late 60s cabling, so basically it looks like it was rewired in the late 1960s. Other than that, you know, the cabling's fine. It's just you don't want this green goo stuff dripping off your cables. So I ended up rewiring the whole property. I did the rewire myself. This was the old cabling that was in. As I say, everything had to come out. This in itself was a huge project. Don't ever attempt work like this yourself. My dad was an electrician, so I used to work with my dad on electrics from about the age of 8 onwards. So although I'm not a qualified electrician, I was more than competent to do this, and I ended up paying an electrician to come and sign it all off and test it and do all the important stuff afterwards. But it would have been very difficult to get an electrician to do the full rewire, because it kind of had to be done on a piecemeal basis as we were doing it room by room. But it was all done, fully tested, signed off by building regs. Everyone was happy. If you remember me mentioning last time, we had some problems with various sections of floor sagging. It became obvious why that was once we got the floor ripped up, and you could see that basically dwarf walls had been knocked down in various places and hadn't been rebuilt again. So it was just a question of jacking the floor up and putting adequate supports underneath the joists, and that fixed that problem. Not a particularly huge job. In this particular area here, you can just about see my car jack that's on the ground underneath the joists. I'm literally jacking up the entire section of floor here just to rebuild this section of dwarf wall under here. It had obviously been knocked out when central heating or electrics had been put in at some point, and no one had bothered rebuilding the dwarf wall, so I rebuilt the dwarf wall, and that fixed all of the sagging floor problems. So there you go. There's always a reason for why this sort of thing happens, and it wasn't a particularly hard job to fix either, once you've got all the floors ripped up and a car jack shoved under the floors. Lots of replastering to do as part of this project. Huge amount of replastering. In terms of flooring, we wanted solid oak flooring throughout the downstairs of the property, so we ended up trying a few different colours. We really wanted like a very dark kind of colour. We ended up using a stain that was almost black. I think it was this one on the left here, and that was really exactly the kind of finish that we were looking for. And yeah, huge amount. I think it was 56 square metres of solid oak flooring. Again, I didn't fit the flooring. We had a company to do that. It was too much for me to do on my own. I was working a corporate day job at the time, so there was only so much I could do myself. We also got the same company to fit new oak veneer doors everywhere, and I think we used the same company to do all the trim work as well, so all of the skirtings and architraves. I'll show you the kitchen in a bit. You're not going to get to see that quite yet, but obviously the staircase needed sorted out. We couldn't do all of this and leave the staircase looking like that, so we ended up ripping out the whole lot, and we just ended up going for a really simple design. Nice simple spindles. The plan was to paint it all white in the end anyway, so we didn't want anything too overstated. Oh, and by the way, because obviously we're losing the light from the window at the top of the stairs there, when it was all blocked up, we ended up getting this gorgeous, huge mirror. It's hard to appreciate how big this mirror is, but it's a very big mirror. We ended up leaving it with the property because it was going to be too big for any house we were going to be moving into, and it just kind of brightened the hallway up a little bit. So if you remember what the hall was like when we first moved in, it was just a little bit dated. So it went from this to this kind of more open design. Solid oak flooring, some nice new, more modern radiators. We ended up having glazed doors downstairs just to let a bit more light into the hallway. Again, this is what it was like when we first moved in. And then once it was all done and dusted, we just felt it was quite a nice, open, welcoming space. Right, the garage. Obviously the garage was affected by the extension that was done above the garage, and also by the doorway that we had put in as well. And because we now had an entranceway into the garage from the hallway, it meant that we could turn the back of the garage into a kind of slightly ad hoc utility area. So all we wanted really was somewhere to shove the washing machine and a dryer, and we ended up just putting it at the back here. This is obviously what the garage was like when we first moved in, and then this was all done and dusted, painted the walls, painted the floor. We've got the new entranceway into the garage, and we've got a nice little utility area at the top here, just out of the road of the kitchen. The garden didn't need a huge amount doing to it, to be honest, but there was this big tree here that needed taking out because it was growing just a bit too close to the property and it was shading the garden a lot. So we did have to apply for planning permission to take that out, but the planning department were absolutely fine with it because there were so many other trees, and to be honest, too many trees growing far too close together anyway, so they were fine with that being taken out. We actually ended up leaving this bunker thing in. The boiler was in there and it was perfectly happy, and to be honest, it's always something that we could have done at a later date to take this chimney out, but yeah, one too many jobs for the minute. At the front of the property, and yes, this was my little baby here, and oh, I miss it so much. The only thing that really needed done was widening the driveway a bit. It was a bit too narrow, you know. If you've got two cars on the drive, you'd have to move one car before you could get the other car out. So what we ended up doing was extending this to a 16-foot opening and putting some new posts in. That did leave the slight problem of how do you match in new block paving that matches in with the old block paving. So we ended up stealing some of the old block paving from the area where we keep the bins, and you don't really see it anyway, and we fitted new block paving in that area, which, by the way, the builders did an awesome job of fitting that in. That can't have been straightforward. They built the new gate posts, and then obviously we've got the old paving is in this kind of section here, so you just can't tell. They did an amazing job. You would never know. Similar kind of thing at the back of the property. We've got this Christmas tree growing in the middle of the patio area there. Once upon a time that would have been tiny, but this would grow into a ridiculously big tree, so it was time to get rid of that. Unfortunately, once that's all taken out, you're going to be left with an area with no paving stone. So in order to sort that problem out, what I just did was make the garden very slightly bigger, make the paving area a little bit smaller, and basically steal some paving slabs from the top row there. There happened to be exactly 9 paving slabs along there, which was perfect to fill in that little gap. You'll notice that I'm doing this without wearing any knee pads. Lesson learned, because I did a lot of kneeling while doing all the work on this property, and my own stupid fault. I ended up getting water on the knee. I had to go to hospital. I'll pre-warn you now, look away if you're squeamish. You can look back now and yeah, lesson learned, because that wiped me out for a good couple of months where I couldn't kneel anymore after that operation, which is marvellous when you're in the middle of a house renovation. Anyway, that was it all done and dusted. You would never really know once the grass grew in at the top section here. Taking this tree out was always going to be fun, but luckily a close friend of the family is a lumberjack and they ended up taking it out for us. When he cut through, we managed to pull it diagonally across the garden. It only just fit in the garden when it fell down. It was huge. Other than that, I think I mentioned it before, the gardens on this property were absolutely stunning and one of the main selling points, to be honest. The dining room, to be honest, didn't need a huge amount done to it. This was before we moved in. One of the interesting things about this room is that we've got these curved corners going on, and we've also got this curved kind of coving as well. Again, main jobs here was to rip all the floors up to rewire. And then it was just a question of giving it a lick of paint after that. Wasn't too bad. So beforehand, this is what it was like. And our final dining room, we went for this kind of chocolate brown everywhere with the solid oak floors. Lovely room, used it about twice a year. Then onto the living room. So if you remember, the living room was like this. And again, you know, it didn't need a huge amount doing to it, to be honest. Obviously stripped it all out. All the floors had to be ripped up to do the rewire. If you remember, this didn't have a fireplace of any description. That was something that we definitely wanted to sort out. Before that though, when all the floors were up for the rewire, it was also a good chance to do all of the AV wiring under the floors as well, and I ran Cat5 cabling into a lot of the rooms as well. Spots everywhere. Again, these were on 2 different circuits just to give a few different options for mood lighting. And then the only major job in here really was to get a fireplace installed, and we just wanted to go for an open fire, and we thought this worked pretty well in this kind of room. Okay, time for the big reveal of this room. So we started off with this kind of thing, you know, beautiful but dated. And our final living room, we've got the open fire, wallpapered alcoves, all of the AV wiring is hidden under the floors. A few people suggested potentially swapping the living room and dining room around and having the living room at the front, but we really liked the view over the garden and having the nice kind of double patio doors out onto the garden, so we were quite happy keeping the living room at the back of the property. We certainly didn't need to make the kitchen any bigger, and I'll show you that very shortly. But yeah, the living room, we just wanted this nice chilled area where we could sit down as a family, watch movies, sit in front of the fire, and again, oak veneer partition doors, same stain on the doors as we used on the floors, and then that just gave us that separation between the 2 rooms. Finally, the kitchen. The kitchen started off life like this, and we had this like tiny little kitchen area and this weird kind of breakfasting room, which was interesting, so it was time to get everything demolished. One of the first jobs was to take out this dividing wall here, but this was a brick wall, so we had to work out whether or not it was a load-bearing wall. There was already some quite substantial cracking above the sliding door, but to be honest, that was just caused from a wooden lintel that had just given way slightly, but you know, it's not going anywhere. But to find out whether or not this was a load-bearing wall, easiest thing to do, knock a hole in the ceiling and find out which way the joists are running. And we worked out that the joists are running front to back. So this is a hole on the breakfasting room side, and then this is a hole on the kitchen side, and you can see there's nothing actually touching the top of this wall. This is that main front to back joist here, and it's not even making contact with that wall. So we knew we were pretty safe to take that wall out. Unfortunately, to find these sort of things out, you do have to make a bit of a mess. It's just one of those things. We knocked holes in walls all over the place trying to work out what was going on. But once that was done, it was time for a lot of demolition. One of the holes that you saw earlier was actually this area here, and it was through knocking that hole there that we realised that there was one little section that was supporting. So this bit here where we've taken the wall out, that is a supporting wall, and it can be seen a bit more clearly here. We've got this big beam coming across here. It's sitting on top of this little section of wall here, and then there's joists resting on top of that beam. So we certainly couldn't take out that section of wall, which is absolutely fine. We just left that little area in, and we turned that into a little shelving area, which you'll see in a minute. And it actually gave quite a good nook for running cables up and down from the ground floor to the first floor. So one thing I haven't touched on too much yet is the plumbing in this house. So the plumbing was interesting. As you can see, we've got a lot of pipes going through here. We also found that there was a lot of pipes buried in the concrete. We ended up having to dig all of this up to find out what was going on, because we couldn't work out why there were so many pipes running through the floor. So we ended up just having to chip away the concrete, trying to follow the pipes and see where they were actually going. And it became a bit more obvious when we got to this corner section here, and we got to this, which was a pipe just looping back on itself. Now, I'm not a plumber, but I think this gets known as a hot water circuit or a hot water loop. And the idea of it is that hot water comes out of the top of the hot water tank and goes all the way around the house in a loop, and then it loops back on itself and returns back into the bottom of the hot water tank. And I think the idea is that when you run your taps, theoretically you get your hot water a little bit quicker, because this loop, it's almost like having a giant radiator under the ground. It's like this loop almost forms part of your hot water tank. It's constantly circulating hot water. We found it didn't particularly work, and a lot of this plumbing had to be ripped out anyway, but it explained why we had so many pipes. It was because of this weird kind of hot water loop system that was in. Again, plumbers, let us know in the comments, is this a common thing in older properties? I've never seen it in newer properties. It didn't seem to really help things anyway, and it just overcomplicated what was already quite a complicated plumbing system. Anyway, so electrics going all in from top to the bottom, so a huge amount of electrics running in this cupboard here. As I say, I also took it as an opportunity to run Cat 5 into a lot of the rooms as well. This gave a really nice little home for all of the central heating controls and cooker isolation as well. And then, once that was done, it was time to fit the kitchen. One of the slight problems that we ran into is that what was the kitchen on the left hand side here has a concrete floor, and that concrete floor is slightly higher than the floor on the right hand side, the wooden floor on the right. So what we ended up doing was installing OSB everywhere to match the height of this concrete floor. Otherwise we would have had to have like a lip in the kitchen where the floor height changed. Either that, or would have had to dig out this concrete floor, which I didn't particularly want to do. It was easier to just fit new OSB everywhere, and it gave a really nice surface for fitting the oak on top of later on. Once the OSB was all in, I just put some self-leveler down on the left hand side here to perfectly match the level of the new OSB floor. And that was the whole project more or less done for now. If you remember before, we had this tiny little kitchen kind of on the left hand side of this breakfasting room thing, and we went from that to a nice big open airy kitchen with granite countertops, solid oak floors, and a nice gloss white kitchen. Of course, we ended up having enough room for our American style fridge freezer with a bridging unit over the top there. We've got illuminated bridging units in the middle here and LEDs all around the plinths. These tiles are actually made of solid aluminium. I don't know if you can tell, but they are literally made of metal. They are like a metal aluminium mosaic. I thought it worked really well in this room, and it kind of reflected off the sparkle that's in the granite countertops. A couple of other things I didn't get a chance to mention before, but we did need to replace all of the double glazing. It was first generation double glazing that was in, and we figured that if we're going to be doing all this, we need to replace the windows. And you can't even tell, it's just the new windows are much more thermally efficient, and all of everything just works properly. And while we're doing that, we also replaced the front door as well. So a nice new black multi-point locking front door, new windows throughout. I mean, that in itself was a huge project. Also, briefly mentioned it before, but in terms of lighting, we ended up going for Rayco wireless lighting everywhere, but it also meant that we could have programmable lights that you could operate from your mobile phone in every room. If you are ever thinking of taking on a project like this, I mean, for a good probably year, maybe year and a half, this was our kitchen. Our kitchen consisted of a microwave, a kettle and a toaster balanced on top of a unit, and we were literally cooking off a camping stove. The renovation took about 2.5 years to complete, and that was with having builders involved to do a lot of the work, and I would say a good 50% of it we ended up doing ourselves. And do bear in mind that my daughter was born in this property as well, so we've got like a very, very young child and a slightly older young child, and both working full-time and doing the renovation all at the same time. So, you know, it does take its toll, but it's worth it in the end. But don't think that doing a renovation like this is a piece of cake. Anyone who's done renovations will know it's hard, but once you get to the end of it, it's all worth it. And of course, as per usual, once we got to the end of it and the paint was barely dry, we ended up giving an estate agent a ring and getting them to pop round and take a few pictures. And yeah, we put the house on the market. Please don't get angry. It all worked out. And I'll explain that story a bit more next time, because you might be a little bit confused as to why we would spend 2.5 years doing up a property like this and have literally our dream house, only to then pack up and start again. All will become clear. It's not that exciting, to be honest. I'm building it up into something it's not. But do subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, and I'll explain it all a little bit more next time. Anyway, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this. As per usual, lots more to come. And if you want to know what this project cost, pop onto my Patreon and you can find out on there. Anyway, take care, folks. Look after yourselves. Be nice to one another, and I shall see you next time. Tatty bye.